Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Very warm welcome to all those participating, attending this fifth open series. This is the open series that the architecture program within the School of Aegis hosts every single academic year. And today, extending a very warm welcome to Yahya Jan, who is the design director at NORR Group Consultants International. And I was reading about Yahya, and I'm really proud and very excited to listen to what he has to say. And there's a beautiful quote that Yahya has, which I would like to read for everyone: to dream and to do. And he says, great design done right can solve humanity's problems. So we're looking forward to hearing from Yahya. A very warm welcome, Yahya. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor, privilege to be invited. Um, I promise to talk for no more than 35 minutes, which is a challenge for me because I love to talk. But I will try and keep it short, and I let the pictures do the talking.
Thank you.
So the presentation today it's an interesting presentation. It's unlike probably many of the presentations you generally see. This one, we are letting you into the kitchen, and the kitchen is behind me. You can see our studio. Our studio in Dubai is about 80 people. We're in the festival city area of Dubai, Festival Tower next to Intercon. And we have a beautiful studio, and we have an incredibly talented pool of designers, engineers, architects, interior designers, project managers. We are a multidisciplinary design firm. Presentation today is focused on one specific project, which is CL. It's an 82-story hotel that's under construction in Dubai. But I'm going to use the project more as a case study to show some of our thinking and how we approach design from a multidisciplinary perspective. I think that's the real theme of this presentation, is how we see design as the remit of no one particular discipline, not just architecture, not just structural engineering, not just mechanical and electrical engineering or interiors or landscape. We see great design as the confluence of all those forces, the overlapping of all those considerations. And also what's exciting for us, and what I wanted to touch on, is that what's visible is certainly very exciting, but what's not visible is also very important for us. And this presentation is as much about the visible as it is about the invisible. Why do we do what we do? Why do we get out of bed in the morning? They say, to do great work in your life, you must have a purpose. And certainly our purpose is to look for that intersection, the magical intersection where art and science and considerations for life come together. And in our work, we believe that our most successful work over the years is work that falls in that zone of intersection. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it happens more poetically than in other projects. But that's the key. The key for us is to look for that intersection and to explore in an open-minded way what the possible solutions could be. And these are some of the images for CL, which I'll be presenting to you in a little bit more depth in a minute. But it's an exceptional project. It's going to be a signature tower. Currently, the thinking is it will be the tallest hotel in the world once it's completed. It's located in the Dubai Marina, and it's well under construction. We are up to level 60 now in terms of the concrete structural work. So some of these photographs, this photograph was taken about 8 months ago, and it gives you a sense of where the project is going. And then What's exciting for us, not just the height of the tower, but also the relationship of the tower and its podium to the public realm. For us, that's equally important. And we've spent a huge amount of effort in grounding the tower and establishing a meaningful public realm relationship between the tower and its neighborhood. Certainly for us, what's exciting is that this tower is going to be amazing. It's going to be exceptional. Yeah? And the presentation today is in three parts. First principles, we're going to talk about the project from first principles. And I'm going to explain and show you how we got where we got. I'll talk about forces and forms, which is really important in the design of towers. Chapter 3 is called Bending Glass, and I'll show you some of the challenges we had in warping and bending glass to clad this tower. Chapter 4 talks about does it work? And for us, that's very important. Functionality and form have to come together. Chapter 5 is called Towers and Trees. We'll talk about our thesis about how landscape can be integrated in vertical design. And chapter 6 is the last one, and I promise to go through these quickly. It's about people. How do people occupy the building, and how does it really work? So I'll start with chapter 1, as always, and it starts with the client. We've got an amazing client in the first group, a client that really wants to work closely with us and that trusts us. And so great design comes from great collaboration. And in the first instance, that great collaboration has to be between the client and the design firm. And the first group and their leaders are truly visionary in bringing this project to life. In our design work, we, as a group, NORR, we provide an integrated design for our projects, from management to architecture, interiors, structural engineering, mechanical, electrical engineering, and also multimedia. But we also hire partners. We bring in specialist firms that bring to the table specific specialist design capabilities which we don't have in-house. Our values really are values of collaboration. We truly believe that in today's world, where problems are very complex, many minds are better than one. We believe in an integrated design process, which is extremely messy in the first part, but gets meaningful and hopefully simpler later in the design process. And we believe in pushing ourselves. We push ourselves not only in our ambition for integration, but also by embracing technology. And we believe that technology is going to be and going to continue to be a game changer in the years ahead. By bringing you into the kitchen, I wanted to share with you the design effort that we put into this project as a design firm. And our effort is measured in hours of work, or all-nighters, or weekends of work. And interestingly, on this project, when I look at the design effort that's gone into this project, you will notice that 45% of the effort is in engineering, structural, mechanical, electrical engineering. About 40% is in architecture and interior design, with the rest in multimedia and management. So very quickly, you begin to realize, and certainly we do, that design is actually a team project. Design is not the remit of any one person or any one discipline. So for this presentation, we went back and we looked at the hours spent over a 3-year period. So we started the project in early 2018, and you can see how this project evolved. And for anyone who's worked in our profession, we live by deadline. So you can see how the peaks and troughs of our effort correlates to key submissions, but you also get a sense of where that effort came from, which discipline. And what's really interesting and a bit eye-opening is that the preliminary concept for CL, which was done over a 3-month period, using 2% of our total effort in design, we made 95% of all decisions during that first 2% of effort, which really convinces me that it's so important that all disciplines are involved in the design from day one. You don't bring engineering in later. You've got to bring everyone in at the same time, because you're going to be making key decisions. The most significant decisions will be made when you've only spent 2% of the effort. So 3 years ago, we got a call, and our client, the first group, asked us to look at a property. And this is the skyline of Dubai with the Dubai Marina in front of you. And we realized very quickly that, wow, this is a pretty unique opportunity. And as we looked at this project, we asked ourselves, well, if it truly becomes another icon in Dubai, and we triangulate it, and we look at some of the other iconic structures in Dubai, what is the relationship of this tower to other towers? Also, what's unique about the property itself and the site? And it is a spectacular property. It has unmitigated views to the water. It also looks back onto the Dubai Marina, looks back to the desert, and eventually the property also looks back to Dubai. And on a clear day, you would be able to see the Burj Khalifa and possibly the other tower in the creek in the future. So as we started to look at this opportunity, the question in our mind was, what's possible? And what we asked ourselves, how can we sculpt and shape this building such that it truly is a deserving icon in the future of Dubai? The process of getting there was extremely challenging. The property itself is not rectangular, it's a triangular property. And to make life more complicated, the property already had a substructure built in the early 2006, 2007, 2008, just before the Wall Street crash. So those concrete piles that exist under the property were designed for a future building, which would look something like this. It would have a parking structure, and it would have a rectangular mass as a residential tower. That was the idea. When we were asked to look at the property, we were asked initially to look at retrofitting this existing design by another design firm to see if we could make it work. And as is quite common with us, we asked the dumb questions. So we went back and we looked at a number of possible options on what could happen on this property. And over a period of workshops with our client, the first group, we came to realize that the challenge we face in some ways is not that different from a square peg in a round hole. How do we design a tower on a property that's designed for a rectangular building? And we felt actually what we wanted to do, we wanted to do a circular building. And not only that, our aspirations and our clients' aspirations were that this building should be unique, not just in its form and its aesthetics, but in its use and in the experience of the inhabitants. So we introduced naturally ventilated gardens. There's 12 gardens that go up the tower. And we did all of this through a series of workshops. So when we were first looking at the project, it was about 300 meters in height, plus or minus, which would have made it I guess, around the 8th or 9th tallest building in the world as a hotel. And then we worked with our client, the first group, to introduce vertical gardens. These are these gardens that go up the tower. And when we did that, the building grew by 10%. And then we felt that there was a unique opportunity to introduce a public facility, which is a observation deck, which will be open to the public, can be used to really go up the tower and to get these phenomenal views. And so once we did those few moves, we went from 300 meters all the way to 365 meters, which made it the tallest hotel tower in the world. We did not start out with that target. It was a byproduct of our research and also our design iterations. We believe in the connection between the hand and the mind, and the use of paper and pen to find ways to express ideas and to convey those ideas and also to test them. So these are some of the very early sketchbook ideas which started to look at this super tall building in terms of transformational geometry, how the geometry of the tower would transform and how the shaping of the tower would be sympathetic to the very strong sea breeze that comes and hits the building. And then very early, this idea of these gardens and how the tower would rise from a podium, a landscaped podium, and introduce these naturally ventilated atrium gardens through the height of the tower. And we also felt that the very top of the tower was a unique opportunity. And we eventually proposed a public facility which will be open to visitors, school children, to take them up to a garden at the very top of the tower, which has spectacular views, 360-degree views of the city. And how the tower and its podium weave together, the interface between the horizontal and the vertical, was extremely important for us. And we spent a lot of time making the podium work. And we did that by lifting the podium to introduce a public space. So the parking structure is lifted up by 9 meters, and we end up with a urban drop-off space, which is the entrance to the hotel. Now, the fact is that design is messy business. So you start out designing in a particular way and you move along, and then one day you get a call, and in this case, a client called us halfway through detailed design. So we'd been working on the project for a year. And they said, we've changed our mind. Initially, the project was going to be 2/3 hotel and the top 1/3 was going to be apartments. And the client decided that they would like it to be all hotel. So we took a deep breath and we went back to basics. And we did that by redesigning the core from first principles. And I can tell you, it's never easy and it's never painless. But we were determined. And so we redesigned the core, moved the elevators to the front, and we ended up with the scheme that we have today. Vertical transportation and the movement of people and goods and services in a vertical tower is critical to its functionality. How do we work? We sketch, we build models, we throw away 99% of everything we do, we throw it away. So we're extremely wasteful and extremely iterative in how we work. These are some of the pictures of our 3D lab. This lab is part of our studio here in Festival City. And we've got some really talented designers who build models. We test them. Our studio is full of hundreds of models, which we build 3D printed, handmade, laser cut. And these are just a few of the studies we did for CL. And you can see that the idea of using physical models very early in the design to test ideas. So here we are testing some ideas on how we were going to wrap the parking structure and yet bring natural ventilation. Eventually, we ended up with this scheme, and you can see some of the models are quite large. So we just build and build and build models, and we keep asking ourselves, is this really the best we can do? It's hard work, but it's worth it. Because buildings and urbanism at the end of the day is three-dimensional. It's not just the plan, it's not just the elevation, it's everything. So this is some of the studies we did, and another study model just to look at the drop-off of the hotel. And you can see that we get quite involved, not only in physical modeling, but then we test the spaces, we produce renderings, we question the details. For us, it's everything. It's not just the party or the large concept. It's not just the detail. It's not just the lighting. It's not just the materials. It's everything. And we must have built, I've lost count, many, many models for the atrium. So this short animation shows you the challenge we faced because the piles were already in the ground. So our engineers very early studied how we could redesign the tower completely as a circular building, resting on the existing piles and supplementing those piles with some additional piles. And this animation really focuses just on the podium. And it gives you a kind of a sense of how complex a piece of machinery the podium is. And you can see the circular tower rising from the back. There's a double helix ramp that takes cars up from the drop-off, and there's obviously a helix ramp that brings you in. And then this concept of gardens. So the entire tower and the entire concept of this tower is really based on this notion of bringing the public realm into the tower and bringing natural landscape and natural light into the hotel lobby. So what you're seeing is the hotel lobby, which will be a discovery, like a secret garden that people will discover when they arrive. So that was the presentation on what I call first principle thinking. Going to forms and forces, as you know, one of the very early challenges we faced was the fact that there were already piles in the ground. So our structural engineers looked at it very early on and we said, yeah, we can do it. We can come up with a completely new design by adding 22 additional piles. And we worked with some really amazing soil engineers who looked at the soil. We modeled the soil, we modeled the stresses. We obviously wind tunnel modeled the tower. This wind tunnel is in India. It was designed by a Canadian wind tunnel specialist firm. And we tested very early in wind tunnel, but also using computational fluid dynamics. We tested different shapes for the tower. This was all done during the first 3 or 4 weeks of the project. And we looked at the prevailing wind conditions, the incoming breeze, and we tested what the impact of the breeze was on the lateral forces on the tower. And the base case was a rectangular building facing the ocean. And you can see the vortices that are forming on the leeward side of the building. These vortices then result in a force, a dynamic force that is perpendicular to the direction of the wind, and that creates tremendous oscillation and the need to introduce a lot more structure to dampen that movement. Now, as we change the shape of the building, you can see, as we move towards a circular building, you can see that the intensity of the vortices is much reduced. And that means a lot. So what happens is that as we move from shape 1, which was rectangular, all the way to shape 4B, which is circular and tapered, we were able to reduce the forces, the horizontal forces, by about 40% relative to the base case, and the moment by approximately the same amount. And that is our thesis. The forms of buildings, in this case, a super tall building, have to be informed by real mathematical and engineered analysis. We had a similar challenge in cladding the building, because once we designed the building as a circular form that's tapered, we faced the challenge of how do we enclose it? How do we enclose this building in glass? Not easy. So what we did, we looked at the geometries of the flow plate, which you can see here, and the geometries are changing. So as you go up the tower, no two flow plates are the same. Every flow plate in this 82-story tower is unique. And the challenge is how to put flat glass panels on a warped surface. And the answer is you have to warp the glass. The glass has to be warped. Now, glass doesn't want to do that. Glass panels, when they are made in a factory, are generally flat. So we used parametric modeling to study just how much we could warp the glass. And that's a tricky thing. So you start with the flat panel, and 3 points of the flat panel are static, whereas the 4th point can be either pushed or pulled to create a warped glass panel. But that pushing and pulling happens on site. When the glass panel arrives on the construction site, it's flat. So you can imagine that you can only do so much. If you go beyond a certain amount, you probably get into trouble. So what we did is we color-coded how much we could warp the glass. And when we looked at that, so the green represents very slight warpage, and then as you move to red, it's much more warpage. But even the red works. But the idea is to maximize the green and the yellow and minimize the red, and then of course not to go beyond the red. And so when we started the modeling of the glass, we found that about 1/3 of it was green, about 1/3 of it was yellow, and 1/3 was red. And so what we did was we used our parametric modeling in an iterative way to adjust the panel sizes and also to adjust the slab edge geometries until 82% of all the panels were green, 16% were yellow, and only 2% were red. And this was a process. This didn't happen overnight. We had to run the algorithm for a number of months, study it, to come up with a solution where when we looked at the building, most of it was green and yellow, and very, very small amount was red, which you can see. And red works also, but we were able to do that. And I find that process fascinating, because if you want to do design that does push boundaries, you have to embrace the math and the technology and the engineering. It all has to work. The question then arises, does the building work? So it's a nice looking building, but does it really work? And what's interesting about tall buildings is the challenge of moving people and moving goods and services. That's a huge challenge. This tower has 21 elevators. 16 of them are passengers and 5 of them are service elevators. And as we do in all our tall projects, we need to really look at the matrix. We need to really understand who's serving what, and also how do goods move through the building. Raw goods, prepared goods, waste, dishes, soiled dishes, clean linen, dirty linen. And it's fascinating. I actually find all of this really exciting. So the building is a machine, as Corbusier said. And in a way, it's almost like a Rubik's Cube for those of us who remember this. You're trying to find a solution where you can get things to work, hopefully without a meltdown. It's not easy, but it can be done. And the solutions, while we try to optimize the solutions, we have to accept the constraints of the site, of geometry, of density, functionality. So there's always this tug of war. There's a push and pull as you look at a project and you look at its elevating and its not only passenger elevating, but also its service elevating. It gets very complex very quickly. And we are fortunate to work with some really smart people who can run the numbers for us. And one thing we discovered is that when we compared CL to some of the other hotels in Dubai, some of which are 5-star, CL's performance is much higher in terms of the capacity of the elevators, the waiting time, what's called interval time, how long you have to wait before the elevator arrives, the service elevator. So we feel we've got an interesting scheme here. I want to talk about towers and trees and our fascination and in some ways our obsession with bringing landscape into our work. Because as much as we believe that density is the future, and it's the future for sustainability, density has to be done right. Doing density right is not easy. And what we've proposed in this tower is 12 gardens that climb up the tower. There are 12 of them. But what's really exciting is that we have computer-controlled louvers in the atrium facade that in the cooler months of the year, we bring fresh air into the gardens and create a natural convection current. And it works. So the trees that will be in these gardens will be real trees. We are going to bring in fresh air. We're going to cool only where people are. So the atrium is an 8-story high space. We don't cool the whole space. We only cool what's called spot cooling. And by doing that, you can see that the energy consumption is much reduced. You can see the actual energy in the lower graph and what it would have been had we done all of it. And as much as I love models and renderings, I love beautiful plans. I think if the plan is elegant, I think the building can be very elegant. And we try that. We spend literally thousands and thousands of hours working on plans. Corbusier said plan is the generator, and it's true. And so working between plan and section and trying to embed within our work meaningful public space and shared space, meaningful landscape environments is really an obsession. And we experiment and play with this on most of our projects. CL is just one example. We do that also on horizontal projects. And for us, sustainability and consciousness about the environment is more and more a super critical issue. And here what I'm sharing with you is the energy graph for CL. It's not net zero. I don't think there is a building in the world that's net zero, unless you do carbon trading. So without trading, this building, even with all its extravagant aspirations, is 16% lower in energy consumption than the baseline ASHRAE standard for cooling. So it beats all the standards that it's supposed to meet. Finally, I'd like to just talk about people, because our work ultimately is for people. People will occupy these buildings and we hope they will enjoy them. And for our work to be memorable and to have meaning, we believe that the interior design and the exterior should work together. And for this project, our interior concept is actually similar to the exterior, where we have strived for simplicity and elegance. Very little decoration. So the inside, in some ways, is very, very elegant, minimalist, clean. And we think that there's a value to that. We think an interior design that has that simplicity of thought, clarity, use of materials can be really meaningful. I hope that was entertaining. I may have gone slightly over, I think a couple of minutes over. We're tremendously proud of this project. We're tremendously proud of the people who worked on this project. It's been a very, very challenging design project for our group, but it's allowed us to push our own boundaries and to believe in ourselves as to what we can do. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yahya. Good evening to everybody who's attending this amazing live open series by Yahya Jan, which is organized by V6 architecture team at Heriot-Watt University, Dubai campus. I'd like to thank Yahya for the informative presentation, and I do believe it was very useful for our students. Now I'd like to move into the questions and answers session. So probably I'll just read out the questions, Yahya, and you can answer them. So the first question is saying that how challenging is it to deal with a large group of architects and designers to develop an architectural project, knowing that you have a large scale, you have worked with large scale projects, you're working with variety of people, multicultural designers and architects. So how challenging is that to deal with, basically?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Look, life is a challenge, right? I mean, I think the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. Our challenge is to work with people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different cultures, different education, but also not just architects. We work simultaneously with our own engineers, structural MEP, we work with our own interior designers, our own architects, our managers, and also with our client and their people, and then with the municipality to meet those requirements, and then with the cost consultant to make sure that the project's on budget. So it's actually, the cast of characters is huge. It's actually not just architects. It's so many different people with so many different specific skill sets that they bring to the table. And then really, in a way, the role of the lead person is almost the role of a conductor in an orchestra. So you have an orchestra with so many people who play different instruments, each one spectacular at how they play. And the conductor has to find a way to make it all work, to make it work in some kind of harmony. And it's super exciting. I don't think, for me personally, it's the most exciting thing in my life. I love it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Another question is about basically a little bit related to what you just mentioned. That's why I've selected this one. It's about budget. How do you deal with keeping the projects under the client's budget, basically?
Well, the first step is to start out with a budget that's reasonable. So in this case, our client is a sophisticated developer They've got many hotels in Dubai. So they established what we consider a reasonable budget for this project in this particular case. But then we work very closely with the client and the client's managers and the client's cost consultant. And we go through construction budget reviews at every design phase: concept, schematic design, detailed design. When the documents are ready for tender, the cost consultant will produce a pre-tender estimate, which the client sees. So there's a lot of analysis, there's a lot of math involved. And there's also compromise. A great designer should be able to work with the budget and still do something really amazing. So I see construction budget as just another factor among many that needs to be addressed. But you can't ignore it. You can't put your head in the sand and hope it's going to work out. You have to engage with the budgeting people through the entire process. Very important.
Yes, thank you very much for that complete answer. We have an attendee who's saying that, I don't know who he or she have followed the project from the very beginning start day, and he has a question about how challenging was the preparation of the site for the foundations. If you can briefly talk about the challenges in the beginning of the project, please.
So the foundation, as you know, below the sand, there were already concrete piles in the ground. So what we did was we looked at, and we knew that we wanted to design a tower that was going to be different to the original rectangular tower that was designed for the property. So it's a new design, it's a different shape. And so the loading is different. So the foundation design became super critical. And we worked with a world-class soil engineering firm to model the soil. So they finite element model the soil itself, the sand, to see how the substructure interacts with the sand. And you know, all buildings settle, right? When you build a tower over sand, it has to settle a bit. But there are guidelines as to what the settlement should be, especially differential settlement. So all of that is done by really smart people, much smarter than I am. And we look at their analysis, and then based on that, we decided to introduce 22 new piles to increase our bearing capacity. And then we designed a raft, an 8-meter thick steel and concrete raft that captured the gravity load of the tower and spread it over the piles. So it's as complex or as challenging as any other part of the project. This project, and as many of our projects, there's 100 things that are very challenging. It was one of them.
Great, thank you. There is another question which talks about net zero. So an attendee is asking, could you tell us what other net zero carbon strategies you have implemented into this project, other than the ones that you've mentioned?
So this project is not net zero. I've never had the chance to do a net zero project, and many projects that claim to be net zero, I believe they are not, because it's done through carbon trading and so on. So for me personally, evaluating the sustainability or the responsibility of a design comes down to many factors. Energy consumption is one of them, which when people say net zero, they mean energy. But all buildings take energy to run. The question is, how efficient can you make it? So that's on the energy side. Then on the use of materials, there is a very complex analysis that's done for LEED certification and BREEAM certification and others, which really looks at where did you get your materials from and where did the people come from that worked on it. That's also quite complex. So I have to say it's a very complex topic, probably the subject of another presentation. at some point.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. We have another question which says most of the modern structures tend to be made from glass and outside. What could be a new, unique alternative material to deal with for facade design?
Well, that's a really good question. So I think we are at the beginning of a pretty interesting revolution in man-made or human-made materials, synthetic materials, and it's just starting. And they will come out of research into polymers and other things, and also facades that are variable, facades that are not static, but they actually change with sun orientation, and they move and they allow fresh air into the buildings. So I think there is going to be a very interesting next 10, 20, 30 years. I think we're going to see the introduction of many new materials in the cladding of buildings, low rise and high rise, both. I think it's going to be exciting.
Great. There is another technical question regarding basically the tools and the medium that you're using. So you showed us a combination of both analog and digital tools throughout your presentation, from brilliant hand sketches to parametric design and 3D printed models. So how do you make a balance basically between these two mediums in your projects? And if you can also highlight what softwares are you using for programming and analytical part and calculations to address to the students?
Oh, that's a really good question. Look, I think if I was a carpenter and I had a toolbox and I opened my toolbox, it would have a hammer, it would have a saw, it would have many other chisels. So tools in the hand of the right person bring tremendous value. And a craftsman, and as designers, we are craftsmen in some ways. Yes, we should use all the tools we can use. And we should use them in an expeditious way. So you don't use a hammer when you need a chisel. So you pick and choose your tools based on the particular challenge that you're addressing. So we are very agnostic about the use of our tools. We'll use a crayon, we'll use a thick crayon on a wall. We write on our walls here with pen. Luckily, we can wipe them clean. We use computational tools, Grasshopper and Dynamo. We use Revit for the production of our designs. We use SketchUp. We use Excel, Photoshop, some Maya. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to us which tool we should use. We should use the ones that allow us to unlock ideas. Because ultimately, the greatest tool we've got is the human mind. None of these tools comes close to the creativity of the human mind. And by the human mind, I don't mean one person. I mean the collective psyche of learning from others, working together. That collective that brings unique solutions that are surprising. You can't believe sometimes we go into a pinup or a design review in our studio and we leave the review with a scheme. We never thought the scheme would look like that. It comes out of that push and pull. For me, I would say if there's a tool that people should think about, it's collaboration. How to work together. And how to work together across disciplines, across boundaries. You know, we run a huge risk in our lives called over-specialization. Designers should be very careful about that. it's not good to over specialize and then have a blind eye on other things. And that's happened. I mean, humanity turned a blind eye on nature, and now we are paying the price for doing that. And we've done that for 200 or 300 years since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So when we embraced the Industrial Revolution, we thought it was amazing. Through mass production and through consumption, we were able to improve people's lives. But at what cost? So the blind spot that we have is the greatest danger, not a specific tool that we use, but whether we are willing to open our minds.
Great, thank you very much, Yahya. So to build on that and to continue the topic about collaboration between architects and designers, as you know, we have a 4-year program and our students are trying to get into architectural offices for training purposes and to do their internship. So for an entry-level experienced architects or for a student level, how can it be involved? How can they be involved for such of these complex projects and others like these kind of situations? And what are your recommendations for students to apply for a job as fresh graduates?
Okay. Look, the years studying design are the most amazing years of anyone's life, because it's a time of great awakening, a chance to explore things. In a studio, you can ignore gravity and you can design buildings that are not subject to gravity, even though we know gravity exists, right? So a design studio, when you're in school, is a chance to broaden your mind, to liberate yourself. At the same time, practice brings with it a kind of a fascinating rigor, which I think the best students can really enjoy. And the short answer would be, enjoy your time in school. It's the time of greatest freedom. And when you come out to work, and certainly come work with us, come out and work with firms like ours, and get a chance to continue your education. Because when you finish a 4 or 5 year program in an academic environment, really that's just the beginning of your education. There's another, I would say minimum 20 years, but probably 50 years of schooling yet to happen. So we're always learning, we're always in school. But joining a firm that allows you to contribute in a meaningful way is really important, I would say. And summer internships are great. Graduate and work with firms that are doing interesting work. Do design competitions. I encourage students to do design competitions on their own, to explore and to find their own voice in design. It's really important.
Thank you, Yahya, for sharing your experience with our students. And here I would like to read out the last question, and perhaps we can wrap up after that. So back to the SEAL project. Can we establish a relationship with the height of the building to its energy performance? i.e., does height give access to more renewable energy like wind and solar energy in such cases?
I mean, again, the question is a very complex one. I'm not sure if this is the right venue for that, but solar energy really comes down to the location of the project, not the height. And it really comes down to the surface area, the horizontal surface area that's available to capture the radiant energy that's arriving on the property. So it doesn't have anything to do with height. It really has to do with location and area and so on. Wind, yes, wind has a relationship with height. and there's lots of data on that. But how do you harness wind energy in a meaningful way? It's still quite challenging, in my opinion, especially in individual buildings. It's challenging. It can be done in wind farms, where it's done at an industrial scale. But in individual buildings, I think it would have a minuscule impact on the energy consumption of a building.
Great. Thank you very much, Yahya. Special thanks from all the D6 team, architecture team, and the students as well for the fascinating presentation. You actually took us through the behind the scenes design process of this iconic tower, and it was really appreciated. From A to Z of the project, all the process was mentioned. It was good to see the structural detailing, the sustainability point of view, and I believe it was quite informative and really good for students to take advantage of. Now I would like to hand over to Dr. Harpreet for closing the session. Dr. Harpreet.
Yeah, thank you, Atusa. Yeah, thank you so much. I think your session today was at such an appropriate time in the semester. We are in the second semester of this particular academic year, and there's so much students are actually already working on in the different stages of their architectural education. So I think it was very inspiring, and I think you highlighted three very important points, which I think is important for the students in a real life scenario. That as an architect, you need to be very adaptive, which is what you had to face right in the midst of a project. You put your heart and soul into it, but being adaptive and resilient in that process is very important. And I think this project is an indicator of the possibility that lies within every single project that a student takes within their education, within a university setting, or even in a professional life. And last, I think what was really highlighted right through this process, as Atusa was also highlighting, is I think establishing a very strong position, a bias, a statement as an office or as a designer is so important, but at the same time, that iterative process is so important to coming to that position and bias. And then you have the conviction and the belief, as you said, in that project and in that process. So thank you so much. And before we end, I want to commend you on the setting within which you operate, because you spoke about people and landscape, and I was like, the office itself is so true to the people and landscape and the setting within which you work. So brilliant setting. And I look forward to some of our students joining this absolutely brilliant working environment. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for attending. And Yahya, we do look forward for the students joining you and you also joining us in the university whenever it is possible.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
the best.